For people who are interested or have a curiosity about becoming a caregiver, a shared living provider, there really is two things that this video will explain to them. One is what shared living is and what it means to be a shared living provider. Our hope is that the video will inspire people and motivate people to pursue maybe a whole life change of caregiving in the shared living model. What is shared living? To really understand shared living, at least in Nonotuck's form, because there are many variations around shared living. We'd have to really go back to the beginning of the organization. A little historic perspective may help in an explanation of what we see and what we believe and what our values are when it comes to shared living. The agency was incorporated in 1972 by these incredible parents whose kids at that time were in an institution. And well before, there was sort of the understanding that maybe institutions may not be the best thing for people. They wanted their kids out of the institution. So they pursued that community residence, a place where their kids could live, and were able to work with legislators from Boston to open up what became the first congregate group residence for children that happened to have intellectual disabilities in the state of Massachusetts. It was based on a very interesting model. As kids, they had sort of a parents who took care of them and worked with them, and so it was not that much different than living at home when they were home. Significantly, of course, different from the institution. The agency grew. It sort of changed its model. Gone were the house parents, and in came sort of group home living. The agency, which began in the Pioneer Valley of Northampton, expanded a little bit into other towns around this area, and then grew and grew through the group home model. In a parallel track, I began working in the field in 1980 in legal services. I worked for an agency called the Center for Public Representation, who had sued the state to close the local institution in Northampton State Hospital. My job was to go onto the wards of the institution and work directly with people about moving them out, getting them out of the institution as quick as possible into a community-based service. And that service primarily was group homes, emergency services, and some day services. I was under a National Institute for Mental Health grant, one-year grant, and when it ran out, I moved into and worked as a program director in that emerging community-based system for people. And I oversaw group homes. And I was struck pretty quickly by how unauthentic group homes were for people that happened to have a disability. Certainly much better than the institution, but there were so many unauthentic things going on in people's lives that I began to explore different options for people that they may want have options of living styles. And I ended up in 1981 in a L'Arche community in Syracuse. L'Arche is an international group of people created in the mid-60s by an amazing man named Jean Vanier, who in a small village in France, which had an institution, befriended two men from that institution and asked them to live with him. They did, and it created an incredible movement as other people sort of signed on to what Vanier was doing and began asking people to live with disabilities to live with them, and became a movement that moved from France into other parts of Europe, into North Africa, and finally hitting North America and Canada in the early 70s, and then in Syracuse in the late 70s, and I stayed in this L'Arche community. I was struck what it meant by people with disabilities living with people without disabilities. I was struck by the authenticity of the relationships, the love that I saw between people, the vulnerabilities, the openness of both disabled and non-disabled people opening up their hearts and their lives and their weaknesses to each other, the sharing of each other's lives to one another, the interdependence between people, where often relationships like this, where the disabled person was always dependent on the non-disabled person. But the relationships were so strong that even people without the disabilities became dependent on the people with the disabilities. And that meant so much. So between the love and the mutuality of respect and the opening up of one's hearts and vulnerabilities to one another, then we saw what became what we believed was life sharing. I brought these principles of LARSH, of life sharing, of the opening up of people's hearts and homes to people with disabilities, and began to implement it in the Pioneer Valley. I was hired in Nonotuck in 1987 when the agency had continued to grow and ran several group homes. And I began right away talking to family members, people that the agency served, to maybe try a different model. Maybe we ought to move away from group homes and move into shared living. And we were successful. And so over the course of a couple of years in the early 90s, 91 and 92 and 93, we were able to move 55 people out of 15 group homes throughout Western Mass into 55 different shared living homes. And it was based on the values, and this is the key part of what shared living is all about. It was based on the values that I learned and I felt and I experienced in LARSH. First, that there was a mutuality of love between people, that it was not one-sided. In all real relationships, authentic relationships, we talk about how one person loves the other and the other loves that person back. And it was sort of a four-letter word back then, love. I mean, social services ran from that word. You couldn't love somebody. You couldn't love somebody with a disability. You couldn't love with somebody that you worked with or whatever. But we used it, and we continue to use it to this day. So the core value is the mutuality of love between people. Second is a mutuality of respect. We have to respect people's humanness, irregardless of what the disability is. So we respect people just for their humanness. The third thing is that we really have to understand how you really can't love unless you open yourself up and you become vulnerable to the other person. As long as you're defensive or you do things that are not truly who you are, but you open up who you are to other people, and that opens up a vulnerability. Can you let somebody into your heart? It's always been that the disabled person automatically has to be vulnerable to the non-disabled person because they're so exposed to us. But now it's time for the non-disabled person to be exposed. So it's that vulnerability. And so it's those things, and then the mutuality of dependence, the interdependence between people that is so critical. In true love, we're dependent on one another. It's not just one-sided, it's both-sided. We learn so much and we care so much and we love so much that we become dependent on that other person. So based on these values, we closed those group homes, and we knew that the personalized service of shared living would get at those incredible values. And this is where you come in as a potential caregiver. We look very closely at who the person is that's going to receive the service. And meanwhile, we look very closely at the person who may provide that service. So we take an invasive look into your life to make sure that we know who you are, what you think, what your values are, what your home looks like. All these things so that we can better know who you are, so that we can better try to match somebody to live with you or you to live with them. So it's a development phase of not only knowing who you are and all that means, but also the person who's going to receive the service and who that person is and all that means. Along the way, we begin to see some connections between people. We develop pools of people who can provide the service while we have people that are looking to receive the service. And at some point, we begin to make some matches. There's people that are curious, people that may be of some age, the same age. We know what works best for people who are going to provide the service. We've taken a deep look into the person who's going to receive the service. They tell us whether or not they want to live in an urban area, in a rural area. They want to live with a traditional family. They may want to live with a non-traditional family. They may have some cultural or religious beliefs, so they may want to live with somebody that has similar cultural and religious beliefs themselves. And we're beginning to be able to make certain matches, as the match is the key to the relationship, and really the key to the success of the service and people's lives. So at some point, we begin to work with family members and the people that we provide services to, and begin to introduce potential people to live with that match. We always try to make sure that people have a choice, so there's 2 or 3 different people that they can make a choice with. We qualify the potential caregiver. We make sure that they're qualified to do this job. They know what they're getting into. They know how much they're going to get from this, what they're going to receive from this, as well as what they have to give to this relationship. And so we believe once we introduce people to the family that they've already pre-qualified. So we believe that the family cannot make a wrong choice. They can just make their choice. So eventually the family makes a choice if they want to. If they don't want to be part of that process, then the agency makes the choice. And so there we have it. We've made the match, which enters the sort of the third piece of our model, which is the transition phase. And this is the time when we've declared the match and the time that people are going to begin living together. And during that transition phase is where we really begin working with the caregiver to have a fuller understanding of what the expectations are around shared living, as well as take a deep dive into the person's life that they're going to be providing the services to. I mean, like, who's a doctor? What are the things that they particularly like? I mean, all these things you'll know in advance, but there are other particulars that we need to do to get through to that unbelievable day when people begin the start of service. So we get through the transition phase and then we start the service. There are 2 things once people begin living together. We don't go away, because this is really the core of what we do, is we support and we monitor what the relationship and how the relationship is going. Nonotuck, by regulation and by desire, will be in your home at least once a month, more if need be. And we're there to do 2 things. We're there to make sure that we monitor that everything is on the up and up, that people are eating well, people are dressed well, people are getting out and becoming part of the community, not just in the community, but part of the community. The person has there's an equity in the relationship within the home. All these things that are going on that are our expectations. Meanwhile, the second thing is we're there to really support you and support the full household in pursuing these and developing really strong ties and really strong relationships. So whatever we can do to make those relationships work, we can support it, advice, whatever, doing whatever we can do, that's really the core of what we're here for. And the final thing is the safeguards. We have to have in place a safeguard situation if something happens. If, for instance, the caregiver slips on the stairs and has to be hospitalized for a couple of days at a moment's notice, we have to have a plan in place to make sure that the household continues in safe and protective ways. So those are the 5 things. That's the model of shared living, which is the values, the development of you and the person that's going to receive the service and making the match, the all-important match, the transition to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and then the real heart of the service, which is supporting you and the household and making sure we monitor at the same time, and also putting finally the fifth part, the safeguards in place. Now, we've been doing this a long time, and we've seen what 20-year plus relationships mean, not only obviously in the transformative sense, what it's meant for people who happen to have the disability, but we've seen how transformative it can be for the person who is the caregiver, the provider. We've seen people grow. We've had young families grow into adult families right alongside that person. I have a friend named Dan who is so integrated into the community. He's like Norm, who walks into Cheers, that he walks down the street, everybody knows him. They're much more interested in knowing what's going on in Dan's life than they are mine or the caregiver's life, as a matter of fact. It's the relationships that have been developed have just been incredible. People, and at some point we'll make sure that you meet some of these caregivers, because how their lives have grown, and how loving they are, and how caring they are, and how they speak of and about the people that they've been living with for so many years is just awe-inspiring. So it's a leap of faith on your part. It's a leap. It's going to be transformative for your lives, but it's probably could be the most rewarding, incredible thing that you may ever do in your life. It's not one way. You will receive so much from people. You will get so much from people. Your life will be transformed, as will you be part of the transformation of other people's lives. So if you're interested, and I hope you can, hope this helps, then please follow up with the person that you initially contacted at Nonotuck with, or feel free to go on the website and find my name. Again, it's George Fleischner, and send me an email. Thanks.